Commander ZYX-Thera of the Galactic Coalition fleet stared at the tactical display with growing unease. The small blue-green planet designated as Sol 3 hung innocuously in the holographic projection, its single moon casting shadows across unfamiliar continents. Intelligence reports had been clear: this was a primitive world, barely capable of rudimentary space travel. Their most advanced vessels couldn't even achieve faster-than-light travel. It should have been a simple matter of annexation. Status report: ZYX-Thera commanded, her forearms adjusting the controls of her command chair. The bridge of the dreadnought Eternal Dominion hummed with activity as officers from a dozen different species worked at their stations. Fleet Admiral, began Lieutenant Korth, his reptilian features flickering with uncertainty, we've completed our orbital reconnaissance. The planet shows signs of technological development, but nothing that should pose a threat to our forces. ZYX-Thera nodded. The Coalition had expanded across 17 star systems in the past century, bringing order and civilization to countless primitive worlds. This Earth, as the inhabitants called it, would be no different. The species that lived there, humans, according to their intercepted communications, appeared to be a typical pre-warp civilization. They had nuclear weapons, crude spacecraft, and a penchant for tribal conflicts that kept them divided. "What's our force assessment?" she asked. 12 dreadnoughts, 48 cruisers, and 120 escort vessels, reported Commander Vess from the tactical station. More than sufficient for a world of this technological level. Through the viewing portal, Earth continued its slow rotation. ZYX-Thera had seen hundreds of worlds like this, divided, primitive, ripe for integration into the Coalition's grand design. The humans would resist initially, as all species did, but they would quickly realize the futility of fighting against superior technology and numbers. Within a solar cycle, Earth would be just another Coalition world, its inhabitants working toward the greater good of galactic civilization. "Admiral," interrupted the communications officer, "we're receiving a transmission from the planet's surface." "Put it through." The main screen shimmered, and, suddenly, ZYX-Thera found herself looking at a human face. The creature was relatively small, with pale skin and dark hair cropped short. It wore what appeared to be a military uniform, though primitive by Coalition standards. When it spoke, the universal translator rendered its words in perfect Coalition standard. "This is Admiral Sarah Chun of United Earth Defense. To the unknown vessels in our system, you have entered sovereign human space without authorization. State your intentions immediately." ZYX-Thera almost laughed. The audacity of this primitive demanding explanations from a superior force was amusing, if not entirely unexpected. Every species went through this phase of denial. "I am Fleet Admiral ZYX-Thera of the Galactic Coalition. Your world has been selected for integration into our civilization. Surrender your weapons and prepare for occupation. Resistance will only result in unnecessary casualties." The human's expression didn't change. "Admiral ZYX-Thera, I'm afraid that's not going to happen. Earth rejects your demands. You have 1 hour to withdraw from our system, or we will consider your presence an act of war." Now ZYX-Thera did laugh, a sound that rippled across the bridge and was echoed by several other officers. "You threaten us? Your entire species possesses perhaps a few hundred vessels, none capable of faster-than-light travel. We have brought a fleet that could glass your entire world." "Perhaps," Admiral Chan replied calmly. "But you might want to reconsider. We've prepared a small demonstration of what you'll face if you choose to proceed. I suggest you review our historical records before making any hasty decisions." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in bemused silence. "Historical records," muttered Commander Vess. "What could a primitive species possibly show us that would matter?" "Run a deep scan on their information networks," ZYX-Thera ordered. "If these humans think their past will intimidate us, let's see what they're so proud of." Within minutes, the Coalition's advanced computers had infiltrated Earth's global information network. Terabytes of data flowed across the screens: literature, art, science, and, most importantly, historical records spanning millennia of human civilization. At first, the information seemed mundane. Typical primitive development, agriculture, early city-states, the gradual advancement of technology. But, as the data continued to flow, a pattern began to emerge that made ZYX-Thera's confidence waver. The first thing that caught her attention was the sheer scale of human conflicts. Most species the coalition had encountered fought small, localized wars before achieving global unity. Humans, however, had engaged in conflicts that spanned continents and involved millions of combatants. Something called World War II had seen over 70 million casualties in less than 6 years. "Admiral," said Lieutenant Korth, his voice strained, "you need to see this." A new display materialized, showing footage from human historical archives. ZYX-Thera watched in growing disbelief as primitive human aircraft dove through walls of anti-aircraft fire, their pilots knowing they faced almost certain death. She saw humans charging across open battlefields into machine gun fire, dying by the thousands for a few meters of ground. "This can't be accurate," she murmured. "No species fights like this." But the data kept coming. Humans throwing themselves on grenades to save their comrades. Entire cities choosing death over surrender. Soldiers fighting to the last bullet, then, continuing with bladed weapons, then, their bare hands. The historical record spoke of something humans called fanaticism, but it seemed to be a standard trait rather than an aberration. Commander Vess pulled up another file. "Admiral, look at this. They call it the Battle of Thermopylae. 300 soldiers held off an army of hundreds of thousands. Impossible. The mathematics don't work. The records are consistent across multiple sources. And, here, something called the Warsaw Uprising. Civilians, including children, fought trained soldiers for over 2 months in a destroyed city." ZYX-Thera's 4 hands trembled slightly as she processed the information. Every species had warriors, but humans seemed to be a species of warriors. They didn't just fight when cornered, they fought for abstract concepts like honor and freedom. They died for principles that wouldn't extend their lives or improve their material conditions. "Admiral," the communications officer called out, "we're receiving another transmission." Admiral Chen's face reappeared on the screen, her expression unchanged. "I trust you've had time to review our historical data. As you can see, humans have some experience with warfare. Your primitive weapons are no match for coalition technology," ZYX-Thera managed, though her voice lacked its earlier conviction. "Perhaps not," Chen admitted. "But technology isn't everything, is it? Would you like to know what we're really fighting for, Admiral? Not just our lives or our world, but the right to choose our own destiny. The right to remain human." The Admiral gestured, and new data appeared on ZYX-Thera's screens. Technical specifications for weapons that shouldn't exist. Fusion bombs that could level cities. Chemical weapons banned by their own species as too inhumane to use. Biological agents capable of wiping out entire ecosystems. "We've had these weapons for decades," Chen continued conversationally. "We've chosen not to use them against each other, mostly. But you're not each other, are you? You're invaders threatening everything we hold dear." ZYX-Thera stared at the technical readouts. The weapons were crude by coalition standards, but effective. More disturbing was the casual way the human admiral discussed them, as if weapons of mass destruction were simply another tool in their arsenal. "There's something else you should know," Chen said. "We've been listening to your communications. We know about your other conquered worlds, how you integrate species into your coalition. You offer them peace, prosperity, order. Very appealing to most species." The human smiled, and somehow that expression was more threatening than any weapon specification. "But we're not most species, Admiral. We're humans. We've spent our entire history fighting against exactly what you're offering. We've died by the millions rather than accept the rule of emperors, kings, dictators, and would-be saviors. What makes you think we'll accept it from you?" The transmission ended again, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Around the fleet, similar conversations were taking place as coalition officers struggled to process what they had learned. Species that fought to extinction rather than surrender. Wars that lasted decades over abstract principles. A civilization that had literally split atoms and bent the power of stars to their will, then pointed those forces at themselves in a standoff that had lasted generations. "Admiral," Commander Vess said quietly, "perhaps we should reconsider our approach." The intelligence reports were clearly inadequate. ZYX-Thera stared at Earth, seeing it with new eyes. Not a primitive world ripe for conquest, but something else entirely. A planet inhabited by beings that seemed to view death as preferable to subjugation. Warriors who had turned warfare into an art form over millennia of practice. "Sir," the tactical officer reported, "we're detecting movement from the planet's surface. Multiple launch signatures." "Are they attacking?" "Negative, Admiral. They appear to be evacuating their orbital installations." New contacts appeared on the tactical display as human spacecraft departed from space stations and lunar facilities. The evacuation was orderly, efficient, and somehow ominous in its implications. "They're clearing the battle space," ZYX-Thera realized. "They're preparing to fight." As if summoned by her words, Admiral Chen's voice echoed across all coalition frequencies, "Last warning, Admiral. Withdraw now, or face the consequences. You wanted to see what humans are capable of when cornered. We're about to show you." The coalition fleet hung in space above Earth, overwhelming in numbers and technology, but, for the first time in her career, Fleet Admiral ZYX-Thera wondered if superiority in warfare was measured by more than ships and weapons. Below them waited a species that had spent thousands of years perfecting the art of killing and dying for causes they believed in. The question was no longer whether the coalition could conquer Earth. The question was whether the cost would destroy them in the process. The attack began at 0800 hours, Earth Standard Time. Admiral ZYX-Thera had made her decision after 6 hours of deliberation with her command staff. The coalition couldn't show weakness to a primitive species, regardless of their historical proclivities for violence. Word would spread throughout the galaxy that a pre-warp civilization had successfully intimidated the mighty coalition fleet. Such a precedent could inspire rebellion across dozens of worlds. "Commence bombardment of military targets," she ordered. "Minimal civilian casualties. We want these humans alive to serve the coalition." The first wave of energy beams lanced down toward Earth's surface, targeting what appeared to be military installations and spaceports. The weapons were precisely calibrated, enough to demonstrate coalition superiority without rendering the planet uninhabitable. The response was immediate and unexpected. "Admiral." Lieutenant Korth's voice cracked with alarm. "Multiple missile launches from the planet's surface, hundreds of them." The tactical display lit up with ascending contacts, but these weren't the crude chemical rockets coalition intelligence had predicted. The missiles accelerated at impossible rates, their trajectories shifting unpredictably as they climbed toward the fleet. "Point defense systems, engage targets," ZYX-Thera commanded. Coalition warships opened fire with precision energy weapons designed to intercept incoming projectiles. Most of the human missiles disappeared in brilliant flashes of light, but a disturbing number survived the defensive barrage. They moved with an erratic, almost organic randomness that made targeting difficult. "How are they evading our systems?" Commander Vess demanded. The answer came as the first missile reached the coalition lines. Instead of detonating against the shields of the lead cruiser, it seemed to burrow through them, the warhead somehow phasing through energy barriers that should have stopped any conventional weapon. The explosion was different. Not the simple nuclear fusion coalition sensors had expected, but something that seemed to tear at the fabric of space itself. The cruiser's stellar harmony simply ceased to exist, leaving behind only expanding gases and twisted metal. "Report!" ZYX-Thera barked. "Unknown weapon type," the science officer stammered. The explosion created a localized gravity well that collapsed the ship's hull at the molecular level. "I've never seen anything like it." More missiles reached the fleet, each one carrying the same impossible warhead. Coalition ships that had weathered the bombardments of a dozen primitive worlds found their shields useless against human weapons that operated on principles their science couldn't immediately understand. "Sir!" Communications crackled with an incoming transmission. "This is Captain Rex Morrison of the UES Retribution. You gentlemen seem to be having some trouble." On the main screen appeared another human, this one younger than Admiral Chen, wearing a different uniform and grinning with an expression that made ZYX-Thera's blood run cold. Behind him, she could see a cramped bridge filled with primitive-looking equipment and crew members who appeared entirely too relaxed for beings facing overwhelming odds. "Your weapons are impressive," ZYX-Thera admitted, "but you cannot hope to match our numbers. Surrender now and your species will be treated mercifully." Captain Morrison's grin widened. "Numbers, eh? Well, Admiral, let me share something we learned during our Second World War. A human named Jean Basilone once held off 3,000 enemy soldiers with a machine gun. When asked how he did it, he said he just kept pulling the trigger until they stopped coming. One man cannot defeat 3,000. You're absolutely right. He died doing it. But he held the line long enough for reinforcements to arrive. See, that's the thing about humans, Admiral. We don't really care about the odds. We care about what needs to be done." The transmission ended, and, immediately afterward, human ships began decloaking throughout the system. Not the few hundred vessels Coalition intelligence had predicted, but thousands. They emerged from behind asteroids, from the shadows of moons, from positions that should have been impossible to reach without faster-than-light travel. "How did they get there?" Commander Vess whispered. The answer came in the form of tactical data streaming across Coalition sensors. The human ships were moving through space in ways that violated known physics. They seemed to be folding space around themselves, creating temporary tunnels through dimensions the Coalition couldn't even detect. "Admiral Chen here," the now familiar voice echoed across all channels. "I thought you should know what you're really fighting against. We call it the Alcubierre drive. We've been working on it since your people started exploring our information networks 6 months ago." 6 months. The Coalition had been observing Earth for 6 months while preparing their invasion force, and somehow the humans had developed faster-than-light travel in response. "Impossible," ZYX-Thera breathed. "No species develops FTL technology in months. It takes centuries of research and development." Under normal circumstances, sure, Chen agreed. But humans have this interesting trait. The more desperate our situation becomes, the more creative we get. You've heard of our Manhattan Project? We built world-ending weapons in less than 4 years during a global war. When properly motivated, humans can accomplish remarkable things in very short timeframes. Coalition ships found themselves surrounded by human vessels that flickered in and out of normal space like ghosts. The humans seemed to be using their dimensional technology not just for travel, but as a weapon. Human ships would materialize inside Coalition formations, unleash devastating close-range attacks, then vanish before return fire could be coordinated. "Their tactics make no sense," Lieutenant Korth reported. "They're taking massive casualties, but they keep attacking. Ship after ship just throws itself at our formations." ZYX-Thera watched in growing horror as human vessels rammed Coalition dreadnoughts, their crews choosing certain death to cripple enemy ships. It was the historical pattern made manifest in space combat, humans who viewed death as an acceptable cost for achieving tactical objectives. But there was something else, something that chilled her more than the human willingness to die. The Coalition was losing. Despite overwhelming superiority in numbers and technology, the human fleet was systematically dismantling her forces. They fought with a coordination that suggested perfect battlefield awareness, as if every human ship knew the exact position and status of every other unit in the engagement. "Admiral." The communications officer's voice was strained. "We're receiving data from the Peaceful Endeavor. Their computer systems have been compromised." On screen, chaotic scenes played out as Coalition crew members struggled with their own ship's systems. Weapons fired randomly, life support failed without warning, navigation computers provided false readings. Throughout the fleet, similar reports flooded in. Cyber warfare, ZYX-Thera realized. They've infiltrated our networks. "But that's impossible," Commander Vess protested. "Our computer systems are quantum encrypted with security protocols developed over millennia." Captain Morrison's voice echoed through the chaos. "Admiral ZYX-Thera, meet our artificial intelligence, Phoenix.
She's been living in your computer network since you first scanned our information systems.
Turns out, when you download human historical data, you get more than just pretty pictures and war stories. The tactical display flickered and reformed, showing not the battle as coalition sensors perceived it, but as the human AI saw it. Every coalition ship was highlighted with detailed structural analyses, identifying weak points, ammunition levels, crew positions, and system vulnerabilities. The humans weren't just fighting with superior technology, they were fighting with perfect information. You see, Chen's voice added, humans have been dealing with artificial intelligence for decades. We've run simulations of digital warfare that would make your security specialists weep. When Phoenix saw your quantum encryption, she basically said, "Oh, that's cute," and walked right through it. Around them, the coalition fleet continued to crumble. Ships that had conquered a dozen worlds found themselves outmaneuvered by vessels that shouldn't have been able to match their speed. Weapons that had broken the defenses of entire civilizations were neutralized by human countermeasures that operated on principles coalition science hadn't discovered. "Admiral," Lieutenant Korth said quietly, "we've lost 60% of our forces. Recommend immediate withdrawal." ZYX Thera stared at the tactical display, watching as another coalition dreadnought was consumed by one of those impossible human weapons. In all her years of service, through campaigns against a dozen different species, she had never seen anything like this. The humans fought as if death held no terror for them, as if the survival of their individual ships mattered less than achieving some greater strategic objective. "Status of the Eternal Dominion?" she asked. "Hull integrity at 40%. Weapons systems compromised. Life support operating at minimal capacity." Her flagship, the pride of the coalition fleet, was dying around her. Through the viewport, she could see human vessels maneuvering with impossible precision, their crews executing maneuvers that should have been suicide runs but somehow succeeded through sheer audacity and perfect timing. "Admiral Chen," she said into the communications array, "I request terms for withdrawal." The response came immediately, "No terms, Admiral. No negotiations. No conditions. You leave our system now, or you don't leave at all. You cannot expect us to simply abandon our forces without." "Admiral," Chen's voice cut through her protest with ice-cold finality, "you came here to conquer us. We're showing you why that was a mistake. Take what's left of your fleet and go home. Tell your coalition what you learned here. Tell them that humans don't surrender, don't submit, and don't negotiate with invaders." The transmission ended, leaving ZYX Thera alone with the wreckage of her ambitions. Around her, the coalition fleet continued to disintegrate under relentless human assault. Ships that represented centuries of technological advancement were being destroyed by beings who had learned to split atoms barely a century ago. "Signal fleet withdrawal," she ordered finally. As the surviving coalition vessels began their retreat, ZYX Thera found herself staring back at Earth through the viewport. The small blue world hung in space like a jewel, beautiful and serene from this distance. But she knew now what that beauty concealed. Humanity wasn't just another primitive species waiting for enlightenment. They were something else entirely. Warriors who had spent millennia perfecting the art of warfare against their own kind, who had developed technologies that shouldn't exist, who fought with a savagery and determination that defied rational analysis. As the Eternal Dominion limped away from the Sol system, carrying the survivors of what should have been a simple annexation, ZYX Thera made a mental note to recommend that Earth be classified as a forbidden zone. Some species, she realized, were better left alone. Behind them, human vessels continued to harass the retreating fleet until they reached the edge of the system. The message was clear: this was human space now, and any future visitors would face the same reception. The coalition had met their match in the most unexpected place, a small blue world orbiting an ordinary yellow star, inhabited by a species that viewed impossible odds not as a reason to surrender, but as a challenge to overcome. The emergency session of the Galactic Coalition High Council convened 37 standard days after the disaster at Sol 3. Representatives from 43 member species gathered in the Great Amphitheater on Nexus Prime, their various forms creating a kaleidoscope of alien biology united by a single shared emotion: fear. High Chancellor Vorth A.K., a towering crystalline being whose species had founded the Coalition 3 centuries ago, called the assembly to order with a resonance that filled the chamber. We are here to address the unprecedented defeat of our forces at the hands of a primitive species.
Fleet Admiral ZYX will present her report.
ZYX stood at the central podium, her forearms trembling slightly as she faced the assembled representatives. Since returning from Earth, she had not slept. The human faces haunted her dreams, particularly Admiral Chen's calm certainty and Captain Morrison's predatory grin. She had replayed the battle thousands of times, searching for some tactical error that could explain the impossible outcome. Honored representatives, she began, I must report the total failure of our annexation of the Sol system. Of the 180 vessels under my command, only 42 returned. We lost over 90,000 personnel, including some of our most experienced officers. A murmur of disbelief rippled through the assembly. The Thyssen representative, Ambassador Keltar, rose from his position. Surely you jest, Admiral. A single primitive world defeating a coalition battle group? What weapons did they possess? Antimatter cascade bombs? Stellar-class planet crackers? Nothing so exotic, ZYX replied quietly. They used gravity weapons, some form of dimensional manipulation for faster-than-light travel, and sophisticated artificial intelligence for cyber warfare.
But that's not what defeated us. Then, what? Demanded Chancellor Vorthak. ZYX activated the holographic display, showing recordings from the battle.
The assembled representatives watched in silence as human ships threw themselves at coalition forces with suicidal determination, as their weapons tore through shields that had protected the fleet for decades, as their tactics displayed a level of coordination that spoke to centuries of military experience. They defeated us because they are warriors, she said simply. Not just soldiers or fighters, but a warrior species. Everything they do, every advancement they make, is shaped by their understanding of conflict. The Zephyrian trait delegate, a being that resembled a floating jellyfish, pulsed with indignation.
Absurd. Every species has warriors. We have all fought wars. Have you? ZYX challenged. The Zephyrians fought their last war over territorial waters 600 years ago. The Thixians ended armed conflict when they achieved global unity 8 centuries ago. Most coalition species haven't engaged in serious warfare for millennia.
She gestured to the display, where human historical footage played in an endless loop.
Ancient warriors charging with bronze spears. Medieval knights locked in deadly combat.
Modern soldiers advancing through artillery barrages. These beings have never stopped fighting. In the span of time it took most coalition species to achieve peace, humans fought over 6,000 major wars and countless minor conflicts. Ambassador Kelthris of the Valdorian hegemony leaned forward, his reptilian features creased with concern.
What are you suggesting, Admiral? That warfare makes them superior? I'm suggesting that warfare made them human, ZYX replied.
Every technological advancement, every social development, every aspect of their culture has been forged in the crucible of constant conflict. They don't just know how to fight, they think like weapons. The display shifted to show human technological development. Unlike other species, whose advancement followed predictable patterns focused on quality of life improvements, human technology consistently prioritized military applications. They had developed nuclear fission not for power generation, but to build bombs. Their space program existed primarily to deliver those bombs across intercontinental distances. Their computer networks evolved from military communication systems. Look at their approach to artificial intelligence, ZYX continued. While other species developed AI to serve as companions or to solve scientific problems, humans immediately began using their artificial minds for warfare simulation and strategic analysis. The AI that defeated our cyber defenses has been training for digital combat since the day it achieved consciousness. High Archivist NMTHYSS, keeper of the Coalition's historical records, spoke from her position high in the amphitheater.
These observations are troubling, but ultimately academic. One species cannot threaten the entire coalition.
We will simply quarantine their system and continue expansion in other directions.
Will we? ZYX asked.
Because 3 days ago, Our deep space monitoring stations detected faster-than-light signatures in 7 different systems.
The humans have left their homeworld.
The chamber erupted in alarmed voices as representatives from dozens of species began speaking at once.
Chancellor Vorthake's harmonic resonance rose to a commanding frequency that demanded silence. "Explain," he ordered.
ZYX manipulated the holographic controls, displaying a star chart that showed the coalition's sphere of influence. Red markers indicated the detected human signatures, probe ships using their dimensional folding technology to explore nearby systems. "They're not expanding randomly," she explained. "Every probe destination corresponds to a coalition world that recently underwent annexation. They're investigating our methods, studying how we integrate conquered species."
The implications hit the assembly like a physical blow.
The humans weren't content to defend their own world, they were gathering intelligence about coalition operations throughout the galaxy. But, for what purpose?
Ambassador Keltar's chitinous features had paled to a sickly gray. "Are you suggesting they intend to attack coalition worlds?"
"I'm suggesting they intend to liberate them," ZYX said.
"I've spent weeks analyzing their historical patterns.
Humans have a concept they call freedom, and they believe it should be universal. When they encounter oppression, they don't seek accommodation or peaceful coexistence.
They seek to destroy the oppressor."
The display showed human historical examples: American revolutionaries fighting the British Empire, resistance movements opposing occupying forces, liberation armies freeing concentration camps. In every case, the human response to perceived tyranny was the same: total war against the oppressing force. Their probe missions aren't just gathering intelligence, ZYX continued. They're making contact with resistance movements on coalition worlds. My sources indicate they've already begun supplying advanced weapons to separatist groups in the Kepler sector.
High Chancellor Vorthake's crystalline form dimmed as he processed this information.
The coalition's power rested on technological superiority and overwhelming force projection. If humans began sharing their weapons technology with subject species, the entire foundation of galactic order could collapse.
"What do you recommend, Admiral?" he asked. "Full withdrawal from human space," ZYX replied without hesitation. "Immediate cessation of all expansion activities. Open diplomatic channels and negotiate a non-aggression pact." "You're suggesting we negotiate with primitives?" Ambassador Kelthris hissed. "The coalition does not bow to inferior species." "Inferior?" ZYX laughed bitterly. "They developed faster-than-light travel in 6 months. 6 months?
Our most advanced research teams have been working on dimensional manipulation for 3 centuries and achieved nothing. These primitives took our own technology, improved it, and used it to destroy us." She activated a new display showing detailed scans of captured human weapons. The gravity bombs that had devastated coalition ships operated on principles that their scientists still couldn't fully understand. The dimensional folding drives were somehow more efficient than anything the coalition had achieved. Most disturbing of all, every piece of human technology showed evidence of rapid development cycles. They were improving their weapons literally during the battle. "There's something else," she said quietly. "During our retreat, we detected massive construction activity in the Sol system. They're building something large." Admiral Chen refused to discuss it, but our long-range sensors indicate structures the size of space stations appearing throughout their system. "Shipyards," whispered High Archivist NMTHYSS. "They're building a fleet." The assembled representatives sat in stunned silence as the implications became clear. The species that had destroyed a coalition battle group with improvised weapons and a handful of ships was now constructing military infrastructure on an unprecedented scale. "How long before they're ready for a major offensive?" Chancellor Vorthake asked. ZYX consulted her tactical analysis. "Based on their demonstrated construction speed and resource utilization efficiency? Perhaps 6 months. Maybe less. Then, we have time to prepare our defenses." "No," ZYX interrupted. "You don't understand. This isn't a matter of military preparation. This is a fundamental mismatch of philosophies. The coalition seeks order through conquest.
Humans seek freedom through liberation. Those two worldviews cannot coexist.
She manipulated the display one final time, showing a projection of potential human expansion routes. Like a cancer spreading through the galaxy, human influence would flow along trade routes and communication networks, carrying their revolutionary ideals to every coalition world. They won't stop with military victory, she explained. They'll teach subject species to fight for themselves.
They'll share technology that makes resistance possible.
They'll turn every coalition world into another Earth, a planet full of beings willing to die for abstract principles like liberty and self-determination. The chamber fell silent as the representatives contemplated a galaxy where their carefully maintained order dissolved into countless human-inspired revolutions.
Some species would welcome liberation.
Others would resist change.
The result would be chaos on an unprecedented scale. What would you have us do? Ambassador Keltar asked desperately. Abandon everything we've built? Surrender our worlds to primitive anarchists?
ZYX-Thera looked around the amphitheater at the representatives of 43 species, each one grappling with the same terrible realization. The coalition had achieved galactic dominance by never encountering serious resistance. Now they faced beings who specialized in resistance, who had elevated it to an art form. I would have you remember that empires fall, she said finally. They all fall, eventually. The only question is whether you accept that reality gracefully or fight a war you cannot win. As she left the podium, ZYX-Thera carried with her the weight of certain knowledge.
The coalition would choose to fight.
Pride, fear, and institutional momentum would drive them toward a conflict that would reshape the galaxy.
And, somewhere in the Sol system, humans were preparing for exactly that outcome. They had always been good at preparing for war. It was, after all, what they did best.